Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Organic Association of Kentucky's um, Black Farmer Plight and Planting Seeds of Solution. This session is going to be led by Michael Carter Jr. Welcome, Michael. We're so glad to have you here today and to go over with us all the things that you wanted to talk about for the presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, today I'd like to talk a little bit about what I refer to as the Black tax or the Black farmer's blight. Most of us know as agriculturalists what a blight is. Usually a blight is something that's in the soil that causes things that would grow not to grow as well or the way it should grow. And today we're going to talk about that from a historical perspective, from an agricultural perspective, better give an understanding of the need for biodiversity in who grows our food, not just what we grow. We're very clear about monocultures and the impacts it has in the environment. But there's also a deeper monoculture that we face on a regular basis in agriculture, where the diversification of farmers is limited. And when it's limited, it really prevents us from having the full expression that we need of intellect, genius, contributions to our agricultural food supply, to our agricultural markets, and to our agriculture industry. I am Michael Carter Jr. from Carter Farms and Agriculture. My family farm is a Century Farm in Central Virginia, or Piedmont area of Virginia, Orange County, Virginia. It's been in my family now for 112 years. 113 years, sorry. And again, this is Black Text. I'm going to walk through this with you. Please feel free to pause it and grab any notes that you may see there. All this information is pretty much free. What is it? Not free will, but free access. So I mean, I don't mind you sharing it. I don't mind you utilizing these things. But the concepts that I shared that are my concepts, please feel free to utilize it to educate others. The Black Text. What is the Black Text? And I refer to it as the extra costs paid by people of African descent or with darker skin pigmentation. These are conscious, unconscious, or perceived acts of racial discrimination, bias, or prejudice. And to understand a little bit about the Black text, you have to have a basis for understanding what is our definition of race. And this is the definition I use, and it's the basis for what I'm referring to for the rest of the conversation. Everybody may have a different concept of what race is or isn't. Some people don't think it exists. Some people say it's a social construct. If we don't have a good foundation and understanding of some base terms, then it can be confusion and misunderstanding later on. So this is what I'm using as my concept and understanding of race. As a creation by Western men in the 17th century as a ruling class, social control formation in response to labor solidarity after Bacon's rebellion in the Commonwealth of Virginia, or the colony of Virginia, in 1677. And it sought to separate a group of people by skin color as the main characteristic, but also as phenotypic traits, languages, generalized behavior, etc. It's a competition amongst the groups of various skin colors for control of resources and power. In Paris in 2024, there's going to be Olympics. Within the Olympics, there are races. Races are competitions. This is the same thing. And instead of competing for a gold medal, we're just competing for gold, the resources of the land, the resources of various other people's lands and communities. But generally, not everyone is aware of this competition as the aspect of this classification is created, because in many cultures, this is not how they saw people and view people, and they saw it as, a phenotypic trait as opposed to a classification. No different than how you would see a white dog and a black dog. If you have a white pit bull or a white Labrador and a black Labrador, it's still a Labrador. And most people don't see any difference in those. They find the joy and the humanity or the life of that creature, that dog, as worthwhile and not necessarily a descriptor for how you should treat that dog because he's white or black or golden. The word description white does not appear in any colonial record until after 1691. So again, this is a relatively new phenomenon in the scope of world history. how we define racism is based on Dr. Paul Anderson's definition of racism in his book Powernomics, page 5. He states that true racism exists only when one group holds a disproportionate share of wealth and power over another group, then uses those resources to marginalize, exploit, and subordinate the weaker group. So when people say it's reverse racism, it's not really that if there's not a power dynamic involved. We can't control certain aspects of your life based upon the decisions that we make. So racism is a wealth and power-based competitive relationship between Blacks and non-whites. The sole purpose of racism is to support and ensure that the white majority and its ethnic subgroups continue to dominate and use Blacks as a means to produce wealth and power. And please don't be taken aback by the use of Black and white, or we have to embrace the facts. And this is just, factual realities. It may not be your reality present day in 2024, but it has been the reality and the foundation of how we've dealt with each other over the last 300 to 400 years. And this is the soil. And anybody who knows me or hears me speak understands that I love to use metaphors, because metaphors teach. And my time in West Africa and working with and being with storytellers and griots and linguists was, I understood the power of a great story, power of making everything relatable. So as farmers, we understand basic things like the soil. So we're going to put some things in context in relationship to the soil to better help you understand the realities of what we're facing. And this is some of the soil right here. These are some of the fathers of what I would term as scientific racism. These are individuals that use science to create a racial dynamic or to really validate a racial dynamic that they believed in that time period, again, in the 17th century going into the 18th century. You see Francois Barnier, Richard Bradley, Henry Home, but the most important individual in this is a gentleman named Carl Linnaeus. And if you don't know who Carl Linnaeus is, you know the work he did because we use it every day. Homo erectus, humans. Cannabis sativa, marijuana, or hemp, depending on what strain. He's the father of modern taxonomy and the binomial nomenclature that we use. So when we say cannabis sativa or Homo erectus, that's binomial nomenclature. That's the system he used to create, to rank and identify organisms that were discovered, that were on Earth, that was discovered. And a lot of the influences were based upon their view on race at that time period. And the views on race in this time period in the 17th century, going into the 18th century, was not good. So Dr. Carl Linnaeus wrote a book called Systems of Nature, in which he classified everything and really broke down and started this understanding and concept of scientific racism by finding different groups of people and classes, from Americanas, which would be indigenous Americans, Europeans, which would be people from Europe, Asiatic individuals, and African individuals. And his stereotypical aspects and traits of these individuals set a foundation, like in the soil, a blight in the soil, for how people saw other groups of people according to their skin color. And as part of the Black tax, we had to look at what things cost in terms of a tax. And this tax is for many folks, especially when you look at what we experience as people of African descent between 1452 to about 1865, if not a little longer, depending on what part of the country or what part of the world you're in. There was 100% tax on your body, on your legacy, on your labor, on your children, on your reproductive rights. 100% tax. You had no control of any of those things, male or female, for a majority of those individuals of African descent who were involved in any aspect of what we would term as the transatlantic slave trade or the transatlantic human trafficking. What is racial discrimination of people of African descent in America since the 1600s to now and continue to cause us and the US? And these are questions that I ask because I would like to know what the costs are. because having a good understanding of the cost will allow us to understand how much or what we need to do to kind of repair these costs. And again, this is just an analysis, a brief analysis from the enslaved Africans and their descendants in the continental United States, and does not include any additional costs to others in South America, to the Caribbean, or to the continent of Africa, who lost a tremendous amount of their most valuable labor, their human resources, or valuable asset and resource, and that's the human resources. And we approach it from a concept of compound interest, because most people understand money and compound interest, that with compound interest, it's constantly compounded. It's the idea of, would you much rather have $5 million or a penny compounded for 30 days? And looking at it in, I guess from standardized, you say, I'll take the $5 million. Not understanding that you would probably get double that if you took the compounded penny, because the compounding interest, the compounding aspect of grows over time. And it's the same thing with racism, discrimination, that these actions have grown over time. They have not been arrested, they're not put down, they've grown. They've been exacerbated over time. And what is compound racism? This is the concept that we developed in agriculture and Carter Farms, which is the total amount of discrimination and the immediate and long-term effects of this discrimination, less the discrimination amount of the present. I was an economics major, so I try to create little formulas. This isn't necessarily scientific. However, it does give an understanding that there is an aspect of racism that I refer to as compounded racism, that it continues to affect. I often state, anybody who will listen, that Black farmers in America right now are 3 to 4 generations behind other farmers. Not 3 to 4 years, not 3 to 4 decades, but 3 to 4 generations. And by generation, we're talking 20 to 25 years. So you're talking about between 75 to 100 years behind other farmers in terms of access to resources, in terms of land ownership, in terms of the perception and their growth and their revenue on their farms, in terms of the size of their farms, in terms of how to maintain their farms, in terms of succession planning for their farms. And much of this, not all of it, but much of this is a result of compounded racism. No, I'll say all of it in some way, shape, or form. Because of the things that happen, the compounded racism has seeped into a lot of individuals who could have been and should have been future potential farmers. But the racism made the occupation, the vocation, unappealing, unsustainable, not worth the squeeze, not worth the time to put in, because you knew what the outcome was going to be. That you will put in all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and potentially still lose the land, the occupation, the vocation, or still not have enough to sustain yourself and your family. And these are some numbers we're going to run through real quick. Between 1619 and 1860, the economic benefit of enslaved peoples for the landmass known as the United States of America was roughly around $50 trillion. 1619, when the first Africans were brought here in shackles under the European colonies. There were already individuals here from Spanish colonies, from Mexico, and from other interactions with African peoples prior to 1619. But this is a point from American history where we kind of note, because of our experience with the English colony, the first major group were brought here as indentured servants in Virginia. $50 trillion. Can you imagine that number? That's a huge number. That's a huge amount of money. But that's what it took to build the nation that we know as United States of America. That you had to pay these individuals a living wage, provided them insurance, provided them proper housing and proper health care. It cost you at least $50 trillion over the course of this 100 and almost 250 year time period. But we're going to start from the value of enslaved persons in America in 1860. I'm not going to try to go back and quantify all that went on there, but roughly 4 million individuals were valued per various studies of between 16% to 20% of all US wealth, or 2 years of national income. And to today's dollars, 2 years of national income is roughly $21.69 trillion in 2019. And just taking an average of those two numbers there, we're talking about roughly about $39 trillion, what the value of my ancestors, your ancestors, and ancestors who greatly helped to build, sustain, and grow this country and the agricultural institution that buttressed and was the foundation for this country. $39 trillion is what they were valued as. And that's some of the foundation, that's on the soil, that's what's in the soil. And here's some of the seeds that were planted. And most of us know in agriculture that there's a seed bank in the soil that, and we see it all the time. If you leave, if you till a piece of land and if you just leave it there, something's going to grow back. If you don't plant anything, something's going to grow back because there's billions, if not trillions of seeds in our soil bank and just on your farm. Not even talk about the countless seeds in other places in the forest, et cetera. So there's seeds there. Sometimes the seeds are planted, sometimes it is naturally there, and they rise up when the conditions are correct for them to grow. And these are some of the seeds that were put in place to offset some of the realities of the soil. Some of these seeds could adapt to the soil properly. They could adapt to the blight that was already put in the soil. Some of the seeds could not adapt to that blight and are greatly affected by the blight in the soil. So the first seed was the creation of the USDA. Creation of the USDA happened in the middle of the Civil War, the war between the states in 1862. That President Abraham Lincoln at the time knew that regardless of how the war ended, whatever the situation was, there was going to need to be an agricultural support mechanism because there was going to be a shift in how agriculture had to be done. And this is a nod to my family. In 1859, my sixth great-grandfather, Robert Ellis, started a community. He was given some land by a Confederate general, no less, in Virginia, before the Confederate War, but he became a Confederate general, or he's definitely a Confederate military person. And he provided my great-grandfather with 18 acres of land. And in this 18 acres of land, they started a community called Freetown, where 12 African-American families came together and started their own community. Out of that community born my great-grandmother, Miss Courtney Ellis, pictured on the right, as well as a young lady who became known as the Grand Dame of Southern cooking. Her name was Chef Dr. Edna Lewis, who popularized shrimp and grits, roasted chicken, and others, and is considered to be a national icon in the culinary world for her contributions. And she learned how to cook from the community in Freetown, the community my great-grandfather and her great-grandfather and others set up to be a support mechanism. And while this was going on as well in the 1860s, the Moral Land Grant Act, or the MORE Act, came about to establish land grant colleges and universities to be a support. Before then, there was no agricultural schools. So they're planting seeds to grow agriculture in the US because they're seeing that a shift is going to happen in the labor force. And you're going to have to educate the rest of the citizenry on how to do agriculture and how to do it well and productively, like the 4 million enslaved Africans had done previously, and the indigenous peoples had been doing previously. And we go into the Southern Homestead Act of 1866. This was maybe not the first, but what was the first official American welfare program, subsidy program, in which 240 million acres of land was taken from indigenous nations, from land acquired from Mexico, out west, and dispersed mostly among white families, white citizens, white immigrants. They made up 98% of those recipients. I know in Kentucky, there were a few Black towns that benefited from this act. There were definitely a few Black towns that benefited from that. And I'm drawing a blank on the community I'm thinking of. So there were some African Americans that benefited, There were some Africans that benefited, but for the majority, 98% was white Americans and new immigrants coming from Europe to settle America. And this process was, a wealth transfer from indigenous nations to white families of about $1.2 trillion, 246 million acres, added at about at roughly about $5,000 per acre, which was the average price that I utilized back in 2020. And I'm sure land is much higher now in most places. And we also remembered, or at least are familiar with the concept or the term 40 acres and a mule. With Spike Lee's production company, he utilized this to make it popular, to let it be known that this is what we were promised, that General Sherman met with pastors in the lowland counties of South Carolina and had a discussion about what the newly enslaved Africans would need. And he said, we need a land to build and grow our own communities, to help build and grow our own characters, to help build and grow a level of confidence in ourselves to grow. We've been growing, and we just need us to be left alone to grow more for ourselves and to sustain us. And this is a proper payment, 40 acres and a government mule, which was very, was plentiful because of the Civil War. There would be no use for any more mules at that point. And this plan was agreed upon and what the Congress had passed, but was vetoed by the president soon after that, Andrew Johnson. And this would have been an $800 billion transfer of wealth to these individuals that would have covered pretty much all of the southeastern states. But all the Confederate states would have lost this land and had to give it to the African Americans, newly freed African Americans and their families. 40 acres. And this was a deficit because we never received any aspect of this. With the exception of a few islands in Georgia and South Carolina, a lot of this promise was never actualized. That's an $800 billion deficit for the African American community we lost in terms of land and land ownership. That would have changed the landscape of agricultural power, agriculture dominance, agriculture influence in the agriculture industry at that time. Going to the Morrill Act of 1890, which established what we know today as historically black colleges and universities, that were the land grants. There were one ideally in every state, every southern state, with the exception of Tuskegee and at the time Virginia. Virginia had two, Tuskegee and still has two, Tuskegee and Alabama A&M. Hampton University was supposed to be had the HBC or the 1890 in Virginia, and now it's Virginia State. In Kentucky, it's Kentucky State. And we know that Kentucky State is the land grant university in Kentucky. And it's one of those realities as well, where you had the separate but equal reality. And we understood that we were separate, but we never got the equal part. And this still impacts to this very day. And we'll go into a little bit more of that later on. And the Freedmen's Bureau, not to go into too much of this history, but the Freedmen's Bureau affected how African Americans dealt with banks and the financial institutions, especially government financial institutions. So when you look at USDA and USDA farm loans, before you get to the Pickford lawsuit, before you get to Garcia and some of those other lawsuits that happened, the Freedmen's Bureau set the precedent, again, with some of the bad seeds that were sown in the soil, where enslaved Africans put their money into a federal institution, and the federal institution folded because of some bad investment by the CEO, Mr. Cook. Mr. Cook never gets the blame for this, but he pretty much squandered all of the money of those newly freed Africans. And ultimately, it killed the Freedmen's Bureau, and it killed a lot of times a lot of faith in the banking institution for African Americans, especially in relation to agriculture. Compromise of 1877 happens, and we lose everything for the most part. And this ushers in time that some of us know as Jim Crow. I call it the blackface era, or the American apartheid era. And these are some of the seeds. Now we're going to talk about some of the soil pathogens that's in the soil that are wreaking havoc on a lot of these seeds. The Jim Crow era. was an era in which there was another $15 trillion that was lost because of discrimination. Between sharecropping, between black codes, between convict leasing, between state-sanctioned terrorism, known as lynchings. That over 5,000 lynchings happened in a 75-year period of people of African descent. That's literally one public lynching every week for 75 years. One lynching every week for 75 years. One murder of at least one black person in public every year for 75 years. And not one person during that time period was convicted of murder, was tried for murder. Never served one jail sentence. Here's a map just showing the lynchings, some of the lynchings that were happening. You see they're highly concentrated in the South, highly concentrated. And this created, if you look at the bottom of the screen there, where it says around 1919, you know, and we'll discuss it a little bit, but if you know anything about the influx of height of African-American farming and agriculture and land ownership was around 1919, 1920, 1925. And this is when the lynching was done the most. And you could see a significant relationship between, or a direct relationship, a correlation between the lynchings and then a decline in black land ownership and African-American involvement in agriculture. That these lynchings ultimately had an effect, and we helped to reduce the number of people, African-Americans in agriculture, helped to reduce the number of African-Americans in the South. And it definitely shaped and molded how we saw the vocation of agriculture. Germination. And despite all of this, those seeds that were put in place, USDA, the HBCUs, the establishment of HBCUs, Dr. Carver and his establishment of the Jessup Mobile and his creation of cooperative extension, his support for farmers, his support in terms of value-added production. We talk about Dr. Carver a lot, especially in Black History Month, where he's known as the peanut guy. And that's so disrespectful to Dr. Carver and his contribution, because he used peanuts, groundnuts, goobers to save U.S. agriculture. That he saved the soils, he saved the institution of U.S. agriculture, and utilized peanuts as a value-added product. Showed farmers how to use value-added principles that we now laud and praise today, as well as showed farmers how to use organic principles, how to incorporate crop rotation, how to use climate-smart principles. This man was well before his time. How to create biofuels with peanuts, with soybeans, how to create paints and latex. His mind was brilliant. It wasn't just peanuts. He was creating an institution. He was creating institutions that could be fed off of agriculture and utilize Black farmers as that root, as that core of individuals that would be able to grow wealth for them, their family, and their legacy. So this is a U.S. Census at the turn of the century. And I'm from Virginia, so I always highlight Virginia stats. Virginia had the most Black farmers in the country at 26,566. And you see Kentucky right there at 5,402 farmers. I am pretty sure Kentucky doesn't have 5,402 Black farmers today. I'm gonna go ahead and just jump out on a limb there and say most likely Kentucky doesn't have that many Black farmers today. The census just came out yesterday as I'm giving this presentation, and I'm quite sure that Kentucky is not nowhere near 5,402 Black farmers. But it's at the turn of the century where discrimination was at its height, where lynchings were at its height, where none of these farmers could get a loan from USDA. None of these farmers could get a loan from a traditional bank, yet they were able to still acquire land and sustain themselves in an occupation of agriculture, and saw the value of that, of putting food on the table for both them and their family. And if we transfer or go forward 25 more years, Virginia reaches its height, its peak of Black farmers at 50,147 in 1925. Its peak. Our census numbers came out today in Virginia, and we've gone from 50,147 Black farmers in 1925 to 1,027 farmers in 2024. We're talking about a 98% decline in Black farmers. Now, if this was a deer population, if this was a blue striped bass population, if this was a squirrel population that had this type of decline, it would be a national panic. Black farmers are going extinct. This is an extinction level event. And we've got to understand that this is an extinction level event. And how do you change this? You have to change the environment for Black farmers to grow in. That right now the soil is poisoning them. The soil pathogens are strangling them. All the contributions that African American farmers have made, all the contributions that indigenous farmers have made, all the contributions that minority farmers have made, we're going to lose it because we've yet to sanitize our soil, to get this blight out of our soil, to even recognize that sometimes we even have a blight in the soil. And we move forward. 1914, 1950. I know a lot of us remember these years where you have the Smith-Lever Act, which establishes a nationalized extension service for American farmers. However, it creates a separate but equal Negro extension service that to this day still exists. There are two extension services. In Virginia, it's Virginia State is the Negro Extension Service, Small Farm Outreach Program. And Virginia Tech is the nationalized extension service that actually have extension agents. In Kentucky, it's University of Kentucky is the extension service. Kentucky State is still the Negro Extension Service. They don't call it that anymore, but it serves the same principles of doing technical outreach toward minority communities and small farmers. And they always and have been since 1914 till 1920 till 2024 have received less funding. So we have an issue in the core of being separate but equal, that we end up having to do more work with less money, which is a whole nother issue, which leads to the decline in minority farmers. So this system is still partly in place, with many 1890 universities having a separate, underfunded sub-branch of extension focused on small farms and socially disadvantaged farmers. And the small farms and socially disadvantaged farmers are the majority of the farmers in every state in America. Yet we don't receive funding relative to the amount of farmers that we require or need to serve. And this is something that you need to take to your legislators, to your administrators at both universities, Kentucky State and University of Kentucky, to get some level of fairness so we can better serve our farmers. There's the Federal Farms Act of 1916. This creates 12 federal land banks and 12 districts, which is the foundation for what we know today as the farm credit system, as well as our farm cooperative. 1917, the farm loan associations have developed 2,000 farm loan associations that became farmer cooperatives. In 1916, these farmer cooperatives back then did not serve African Americans. Now they may serve it, but the gap is so wide, it doesn't benefit us as much. We've got to deal with this reality that this is partly, or this is somewhat why I say that Black farmers have had a challenge for the last 3 to 4 years. We're 3 to 4 generations behind. This is in 1916. They got $500,000 per banking institution to provide support for these farmers. And that $500,000 in today's money, $500,000 in 1916 money, which was equatable to about $4 to $5 million in today's money. But despite that, we persisted. This is a picture of my great-grandfather, John Lewis Carter. To the left is the deed for my family property. And he owned land roughly 5 miles from my family property. Potentially even bought it from my family. I haven't been able to verify that. So they ended up marrying their daughter, my great-grandmother. But this is our deed. In 1910, my great-great-grandparents, Jefferson Davis and Catherine Walker Shirley, purchased their property, 150 acres for $722.05, November 5th, 1910. And this is a message I want to send to those aspiring landowners. Do it. Whatever it takes to get it done, to get you a plot of land that you can call for yourself, please do it. We need that. We need more landowners because they didn't know me. They didn't know my father. They didn't know my grandfather when they bought this. But I've benefited. My father has benefited. My grandfather has benefited. Hundreds of our family members have benefited from their purchase, their vision, their sacrifice to make sure they had land for their family. These are some of the other areas in which we started to see other levels of discrimination being put in. The Agricultural Marketing Act, Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is one of the first farmer subsidies that encouraged farmers not to grow crops. The Emergency Farm Mortgage Act of 1933, which we were actually a benefactor of when our land was almost in foreclosure. But because of the Mortgage Act, my grandmother was able to come in and raise money to get us out of debt to make sure that we could keep the land in the family. The Social Security Act of 1935, most of us think that was good, but it didn't apply to farmers. And it didn't apply to farmers because the majority of the farmers in the South were still Black farmers. So they didn't want us to have benefits. And this drove a lot of young farmers out of the agricultural occupation because who wants to work until they die? Social Security gave us a chance to work and been able to retire with something being given to us. But if you were a farmer or a domestic worker, you didn't qualify. Same thing with unemployment insurance, same thing with the minimum wage. So no minimum wage for individuals in the farming or domestic service occupations. And this is an ode to my grandfather, my uncles who served in World War II, who served in Korea, who served in Vietnam. We've had a Carter to serve, or a member of my family to serve in almost every American conflict since the Revolutionary War. And these are some of the costs of some of these New Deal era policies that ultimately affected us. Labor discrimination costs us another $4.4 trillion. Education discrimination cost us $2 trillion. Housing discrimination cost us almost another $2 trillion because the GI Bill didn't apply to Black soldiers. Over 1 million soldiers went and fought in World War II, including my grandfather and his two brothers, and many other of my family members, uncles, and friends of the family. And we got nothing for it when we came back, but a hard time and discrimination and racism. And I'll go back to that. I won't go into it, but you can take a look at that. The Evans-Allen Act of 1977 was supposed to level the playing field between the 1862s and 1890s, where it provides capacity funding for food and agriculture research at the 1890 land grants in a manner similar to that provided to the 1862. Congress recognized that we weren't getting equal funding. And as of today, and this is in 2012, but the numbers haven't changed much, there's only one state that actually has a one-to-one match provided between the 1890s and 1862s from their state governments, and that's Alabama. And in Mississippi, there's more than 100% match, which is a good thing. And there's a few green, but there's a whole lot more red. And those reds are not 100%, which means we're not holding true. And I don't know if you see Kentucky right there, but Kentucky's in red as well. Oh. The National Agricultural Research Extension and Teaching Policy Act, again, another act to support agricultural research and equity or equality, some level of equity equality with the 1890s. The fruit. This is what we're dealing with right now in Virginia, and I'm sure it could be similar in Kentucky as well. Cooperative extension and agricultural research. The funding that's provided is limited. And the funding that's provided for the Small Farm Outreach Program, as of the last budget, which is in 2022, was the same amount of money that's provided for hybrid striped bass production or research, $392 I'm sorry, $394,000 was for Virginia State University. The research and extension activities aimed at the production of hybrid striped bass, $392,107. Virginia State University's budget has been the same since the year 2000 for the Small Farm Outreach Program. So the legislation is treating us like we're endangered species, hybrid striped bass, getting ideally the same amount of funding as hybrid striped bass research. As a university who has a small farm outreach program that's supposed to service 42,000 farmers in the state of Virginia. But Kentucky has its own challenges. This is September 20th, 2023. Feds called on state to address $172 million underfunding of Kentucky State University. So this is the fruit. This is the reality of what we've done. That not yesterday, but this is yesterday, but still not as far away. This is not 1930s that we're talking about. This is not the 1923 that we're talking about. This is 2023. That people are bringing this to our attention. But we recognize some of the problems, and there's plenty of problems to discuss, but we really got to focus on solutions as well. So you got to ask yourself this question: well, what has been shared? What does equity mean to you and your organization, your institution? And then how do you get to that goal? These are questions that you need to ask yourself. You need to ask your institutions. You can bring me in to ask those questions. I can ask those and a whole bunch more, and I'm sure others can assist you with asking those questions as well. And I ask this question all the time after the murder of George Floyd. Are you, as an individual, as you as an organization, institution, are you interested in change or committed to change? Because we saw what happened after the murder of George Floyd and people changing their mission statements and making all these performative statements around changing and recognizing, oh, I didn't know, or we got to do better. And now if you look at where we're at in 2024, we've kind of been lulled back to this interesting change. I'm interested in change, but I'm not really committed to it because for the last 2, 3, 4 years, I tried to, it's been too hard for us and we haven't made any real substantive moves. So you got to ask a question, look at yourself in the mirror and really ask in your soul. And not based upon what you say, based upon what you've done over the last 3 to 4 years. Have you been interested in change or committed to change? Because a lot of us are committed to it, despite the fact that we know a lot of folks aren't interested. Despite the fact that we know a lot of people aren't committed. And we do this because we want to right the wrongs of our ancestors. We want to right the wrongs of your ancestors. We want to fix these problems so our children don't have to adopt these things. I don't want my children to have to be teaching the same things that I'm teaching. If I've done that, if they end up doing that, I failed and so have you. We failed as a society. We got to keep doing this over and over again, expecting a different result. That's insanity. And these are some of the unfair trade practices, or at least some of the realities of what we're facing today. In 2018 and 2019, it was $28 billion given for unfair trade practices with China under the Trump administration. Of that, less than 1% was provided to socially disadvantaged farmers, Black farmers, Latino farmers, Indigenous farmers, Asian farmers. 2020, $13 billion worth of COVID relief subsidies came out. Of that, less than 500 million, again, was to those disadvantaged, historically underserved farmers, especially Black farmers. We've seen a decline in Black farmers every 4 years of at least 25% in almost every state. Total number of Black farmers with direct loans from USDA, presently statewide, countrywide is 460. Countrywide, amongst approximately 41,000 Black farmers among the country. And the average age of a Black farmer in the US is 62. 62. That's the average age of a retiree. That's not the average age. It shouldn't be the average age of a farmer. They should be looking to retire at that age, not get into farming. But generally they had to get into farming at that age because that's when they had the most financial security to support themselves and their families. And I encourage anyone, if you want, people ask you how to change, what you need to do, I say you need to acquire a PhD. Say it with me. I need to get my PhD.
I need to get my PhD.
Thank you. Get your PhD.
Yes, sir.
You want to obtain a PhD. What is a PhD? It's not philosophy of doctorate. It's purchase, hire, and deposit. Purchase from Black businesses, purchase from Black farmers, hire Black personnel, leadership, financial decision-making, board opportunities, control opportunities, positions that allow them to control the purse, and deposit in Black-owned financial institutions. Deposit in Black-owned organizations. Invest in those organizations. Help them to improve their capacity to continue to grow and serve the individuals they serve. And then, after you get your PhD, I need you to get a postdoc. Because that's the natural progression of you get your PhD. You got to do some postdoc work. And this postdoc work, anybody can do. And it's part of the greatest transfer of wealth that comes after death. You need to will your wealth to Black people, Black businesses, Black institutions. Not all of it, because you want to make sure you take care of your family, but I'm sure you can provide something for these institutions in your will, in your trust, in your foundation, that you're providing this on a regular basis. Every year, you're making a contribution, and not just to the large organization, NAACP or National Action Network or some of these other larger organizations, but to local institutions that actually are on the ground doing effective work and making effective change in the agriculture arena. This is something that can be done. No one has to know until you do it, until you go away, and then anybody complain with you about it. It's already done. This is the wishes of your heart to make a change for the future. That we can make a change even in our deaths. Other things that you can do is have agriculture, the nonprofit, or organizations like agriculture perform a racial literacy workshops for staff, perform racial equity audits. What we try to do is elevate our clients into implicit bias training to help us understand culturally. There's an anti-Black thread that goes through almost every culture. You've got to be able to identify it, see it, and work to root it out, but also work to identify it when it shows up, because it's going to show up. It shows up in Black communities. Yeah. We do a speed of racial trust trainings. We had these workshops like here, we talk about the Black text. I teach a course at the University of Virginia strictly on agriculture. 2.5 hours every week, I'm talking about the issues of Black farmers and ultimately the solutions on how to do this. I've done this numerous times with various universities, institutions, governments, federal, state, with the USDA. It helps because educating yourself about these things helps you be able to have a better armament in how to protect yourself and how to help grow your institutions. Because many times we're going to lean on our own understanding. And a lot of times our understanding is not full enough to understand and appreciate the complexities that we face with discrimination and racial bias in agriculture. Yeah, I'm a strong believer in putting your money, your investments, your assets where your social mouth, your social heart, or your heart is. Because we say a lot of things on social media. We do a lot of things. We say, hey, we're going to stand for this, we're going to stand for that. But where are you putting your money? Where are you putting your investments? Where are you putting your time, your assets? And these are things that from an institution that you need to start to adopt and to address. Because you have to identify the problem and recognize and put some action plan to those things. So set and then define annually, quarterly, racial literacy, because that's one of the first things we teach. And this is part of my racial literacy course. Many of us are racially illiterate. You may know some basics, but you can't read what's happening with certain decisions, certain actions that your organization takes, certain positions that you may hold in your mind. So you need some level of racial literacy to understand the nuances, what African Americans have to do when we say we got a code switch. When Frantz Fanon wrote, we had to wear the mask. When we're told from a young age that we can't be who we are for fear of discrimination. And you've got to help as institutions, organizations, businesses. You've got to encourage us to be us. by being, more inviting and be more understanding and not label things as ghetto or unprofessional, things like that. You got to have an outside, non-partial, black-led organization consult and evaluate and audit you racially annually. You got to have somebody who's not on your payroll, who's not scared to say the hard things to you directly about what the situation is in a professional manner, but also being understanding, blunt, and curt about where you're falling short, what you need to do better, what they're hearing, what they're seeing from other folks, what they're hearing from your staff members. Because many of us, when we go into board meetings and just regular meetings, we have a meeting before the meeting to discuss things and say, they ain't gonna talk about this. Take it, or a meeting after the meeting to discuss what you didn't talk about in the meeting. Because people, for the sake of their own job security, for the sake of their own perception in their job or institution, may not say those things. And we have to give them the opportunity to be able to share those things. We've got to learn how to listen first. Listen to hear, and then to understand. And sometimes it doesn't need a response. You got to be okay with being uncomfortable. You got to look to be challenged and pushed. Like being in the gym. Most of us, we set goals. When you do that first push-up, it's hard. When you do that first 10, 15 push-ups, it's hard. When you try to do that fifth pull-up, it's hard. But do you stop because it's hard? Do you stop because you're being challenged? Or do you keep pushing through so you can do 10 push-ups, so you can do 20 push-ups, you can do 50 push-ups? The more you do, the more you lean into this and accept criticism, context, understanding that's given from others, the more you're going to grow, the more you're going to get stronger from a race literacy standpoint. Start a book club and it's what?
I'm sorry. I'm just really glad that we're at this screen right here. One of the questions that I had was like, how do we as an organization move this work forward? And I just see, just in what you just said, it's like, I've always been in the aspect of like, we don't have to answer to anybody. We need to, answer to ourselves and really like look at ourselves. But looking at having this outside, non-partial, Black-led organization, consultation, I really like that. It just really stuck a ding in me, deep in me when I read that and when you said it. So sorry, I get a bit emotional, but that was just something that really struck me because it's very important. But please continue. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you. No, please don't apologize. And again, this is all part of the process. When we have these emotional responses, it's okay to let it out. It's okay to express it because for decades we've been holding this in. We've not been able to share how we felt. Over the last 5 years is the first time that we actually even start talking about this. That we could have had this conversation in 2005 with organizations. So please express it because this is a responsibility to us. And I'm not sure if it's in this slide or not, but I want to be very clear. Racism is a white people's problem. We're doing the work of trying to fix or help you fix the problem. But I spent 5 years living in West Africa. I was called a white man. Not because of my skin color, because of my content and my character. Because my mannerisms, my speech, my actions, my thought patterns are from the West. And they recognize that as much as I'm as dark, or if I see I'm a Black person, from a skin color perspective, my character is still white.
Yeah.
They didn't see.
It's applicable to ourselves. Just even ourselves as Black farmers in general, like just this part, just being so responsible in this way, I think it's
our responsibility to change it. We are the only ones that can change it. We have the understanding and we've lived here long enough to understand the realities of racism, what it is and what it is, how it comes about, how it's so. When somebody says you're racist, the context may be different where it's, they may be thinking instead of racist, that it may be prejudice, it may be bias, but it's in the same family.
Mhm.
Something is making you see me not as a human, but as a Black person. And you're not treating me the way others would be treated. And we see this continually. We see it on the news on a regular basis. Not to get too political or too, but we see it with how Donald Trump is treated versus how Barack Obama was treated. He gets a whole different pass, whole different level of allegations given to him. If the shoe was on the foot, we wouldn't know who Barack Obama was. He definitely wouldn't be running for president. And it's these things that are deep inside of us that we have to understand that there's again, it's in the soil, and it's in the soil of our souls, and we have to actively uproot it.
Mhm.
The next thing that I encourage is starting a book club initiative with your board of directors, with your leadership, management, staff, your organization. We have a list of resources at our website of various books around different topics. So no matter what your area of concentration is in, there is a book about the racial realities of that area in it, on it. You know, finances, banking, medical, agriculture, education. And we try to highlight all those books to give you a sense. And we don't mind helping to facilitate those conversations, helping to guide them, but you have to do the work of reading it and doing the introspection and asking the questions. Another thing that we always encourage you to do, especially when we do events at our farm, is ask the dumb question, ask the stupid question, ask the racist question. Because chances are, if you're thinking like this, you're not the only one that's thinking like this. And I want to help you get a historical or social context around why this is and why you think this is this way. I don't take offense to that in any way, shape, or form. And I don't want you leaving less educated than when you got there. I want you to leave more educated. And again, we got to start with a shared understanding and definition of racial equity. If there's 18 different racial definitions of equity in your organization, guess what? You'll never get to a point of having some level of racial equity. It has to be one unified. This is what we mean by racial equity. So then we can say, okay, this is the one point we're driving toward. Buy produce from Black farmers. I can't stress this enough. Black farmers need customers. We're businesses. No business can go on by providing charity to our communities, by giving things away, you know, because someone else, the government or someone else hasn't done it, and you put it on us. Buy produce and buy it at a valued price. I push for institutions to buy from my farmers at a retail price, but wholesale volumes to make up for some of this deficit that's been done over the last 3 to 4 generations. We need support. We're businesses first and foremost. We're farms, but if we're selling, we're businesses as well. Provide loans and financing for Black farmers. It's critical for us to be able to operate. Personally, if you see something, say something. You feel it, say something. Don't sound right, don't feel right. That didn't come off right. Maybe you don't understand what you said, but this is what it is. It's okay to have these conversations. Create an office or department for racial discrimination or civil rights. This is something we're pushing for more so federally outside of the USDA. That's been a challenge where they have offices of civil rights within the USDA, but it's under the leadership of the USDA, so it still doesn't give as much support. Establish equity task force that centers community, because we have a really bad habit of siloing institutions, and an equity task force that centers around community. The Black beauty store has a direct correlation with the Black farmer, has a direct correlation with the Black bank or the Black church. They're interconnected. And we've got to understand that it's not just Black farmers and that's it. It's a communal, interconnected reality that we all have to work through and work with in harmony to fix it for the whole. That if my sister, a hairdresser, is struggling, but my farm is not doing well, we're still struggling. That it's a collective whole that we're all benefiting, because that Black beautician, he still eats. He still has medical needs, which all can be adjusted and dealt with through the efforts and the production of Black farmers and local farmers or small farmers. Gather the data. The U.S. Census, this came out. We've got to really get into these numbers. really tell a story around the data. That's what we're doing in agriculture. The whole team of doctors and master's degree folks going through and getting these numbers and being able to make these presentations to their legislators. This is the reality. We're dying. We're about to go extinct. We have one in the state of Virginia, one farm loan for Black farmers per the U.S. Census. Not my numbers, what you told us, what you shared with us in those numbers that's been reported back to you. Do system analysis of root causes. That's some of what we did there, at least with the root causes today. Identify strategies and develop resources. Target those resources to address root causes with community-centered approach. Again, this is kind of what I meant before, that when you're dealing with a soil pathogen, you don't just deal with that pathogen, or you're dealing with an issue with plants. You got to deal with the soil, the environment. Are they getting everything they need to be successful? Is this the right plant for this environment? We've got to deal with this in a holistic way, the same way you would do with your farm. If you had late blight in your farm, you would not keep planting seeds in there. You would actively try to sterilize your soil. You would move, and then you would take extreme measures to make sure that that blight that was in your soil did not spread to other parts of your farm or even your neighbor's farm. Yet, with racism and discrimination, we don't do the same things. We allow it to continue to fester in the soil, grow in the soil to hamper these seeds, these plants. These young and old Black farmers who are struggling, who wants to do this, but can't catch a break anyway. Continue evaluation of services and strategies. And you got to personally invest in your own individual anti-racist journey. You got to read the books. You got to look at the documentaries. I can't do it for you. I've been Black all my life, at least most of it. I've been Black most of my life. When I was in Ghana, I was still Black, I guess, Black American. Oh, no, I was a white man there. So I was a white man in Ghana, but outside of that, I've been Black most of my life, and I've experienced it. I got a library. I read. But you have to do the same thing. You have to better understand. You have to better invest that time. We do dinners at our farm every summer, our dinner and a race. We have conversations with churches, with organizations, with chefs, with USDA agencies, with soil and water agencies around it, because we've got to know and we've got to look into it and see it and understand it. And everybody can identify what we're talking about. But this is not unique to us. We see it. We experience it continuously. You heard somebody say something. You saw something that didn't seem right in the paperwork or didn't seem right the way you were treating them. And you just didn't say anything. You didn't identify it. And these are some more system-specific goals. Use your institutional buying power. Purchase from Black and brown farms. We do this a lot. Check out the Black Farmer Index. Kentucky is on the Black Farmer Index. Figure out how to support those farmers. Figure out how to help to get them GAP certified. We've increased the number of Black GAP certified farmers in Virginia by 50% in 2023. And granted, we just added one, we only had two, so now we got three. We're about to add maybe 4 to 5 more. We've done a group GAP session to get our farmers GAP certified. We're working with institutions to provide markets for them once they get GAP certified. Again, to pay or try to get as close to retail as possible in pricing, but still provide wholesale volume. But still sell it at wholesale volume. And I'm going to move a little faster here. Hire fully funded support Black and brown institution, extension service agents. These are critical. When they go out and they talk to farmers, it's about relationships. And it's tougher to build a relationship with people or a culture that you're not as familiar with. Hire Black scholars and adequately compensate them in salary. Follow the lead of other Black food justice advocates and invest in their strategies and solutions. A lot of institutions want to pick our brains, and we want to partner with you so you can go out and do all the work for that and pay you pennies per what they receive largely for the grant. Make us much more competitive partners, or say, I want to partner with you, but I want you to take the lead. I want that direct deposit. I want that check to come to you, and then you pay us for some of our stuff, as opposed to the other way around. We've got to flip the script. We've got to give a lot of these institutions a lot more power, a lot more influence, because we have the ear of the folks you're trying to reach. We have the trust of the folks you're trying to reach. And we've got to be compensated accordingly to keep us going, because you're compensated accordingly in your position, or have been in the past. You weren't compensated accordingly, you wouldn't be working there. Don't expect others to do the same thing. And this is a bit about who we are, some contact information for you, about us, about what we do, related to Carter Farms, agriculture. We say we do a lot, but we do what we can to uplift the vocation, uplift my ancestors, uplift your ancestors, uplift those who've made a sacrifice in agriculture, who made a sacrifice in their land so that we could be here today and thrive. That no one wants their children not to thrive. And those little boys there, that's my sons. They have a seed company. Don't go to the website to order seeds right now. We're a little low in stock. But I do what I do to make sure they don't have to do what I do. I don't want them to have to do what I do. I want them to actually be farmers, and not just a Black farmer. Not having to teach about Black farmer issues because they still haven't been resolved after 100 years, 150 years.
I appreciate that so much. I had just a few questions, and the first one you really just answered with the last two slides in our discussion, and that was how can organizations like Oak activate diverse farmers in their state. And so I feel like that was really covered in what we can do to make change and to be committed to it. But I'd also like to know, what advice do you give to Black farmers to fortify infrastructure and to deal with the challenges that we face, the obstacles and the barriers with the agriculture industry, as far as like gatekeepers and decision makers, when we're dealing in these situations or in these offices? What advice do you give the farmer to build their farms, dealing with all that we're dealing with?
Well, I would always advise, and thank you for the question, because it's one that I face myself, and one that we continuously face. I'll be transparent. I returned back from Ghana, West Africa in the fall of 2017. And I had sold everything to live and moved to West Africa with the idea of never returning back to America. And when I returned back, I was living with my parents. And I started my farm from my parents' bedroom, literally. They had better internet connection in the bedroom than in the other parts of the house. Taking on the legacy and starting small. I planted some things at my family farm, and started to do my research and find a niche market. I encourage start small in your works. Whatever you're growing, find a market for it. Sell yourself. Cultivate your story, whatever that is. Mine is based on my family history. Yours may be based upon your growing practice, your journey, your experience in the military as a veteran, your experience in terms of your health journey, your mental health journey, your desire to grow more natural foods, your desire to better feed or serve a community, your desire to support native plants and native pollinators and the like. Whatever your journey is, incorporate that into your story, into your idea of your farm, because that's part of who you are, and you got to be able to tell that and tell it first. You got to sell it, just tell it. Be comfortable in whatever it is you want, but be also malleable to grow in that. Financing, I call myself a grant farmer, so I seek a lot of grants. We provide grants for farmers now to support them in different projects they may have. Not major, we don't really advertise it, but we don't mind if you call me and say, I got this thing and I need X, Y, and Z. In my budget, I'm gonna send you a check. And there's other organizations like that that can support you. And you can, without getting into too much detail, you can email me. They might email information still on there, and I can provide some guidance and support in different areas of the country that you may be in and can find that support. So I seek a lot of grants through USDA. I've been fortunate enough to receive a lot of them, put myself on a financial footing that allows me now to do what I do now in terms of being more so a full-time farmer. And I turned myself into a gatekeeper of sorts. I allowed my work and I won't say a gatekeeper, I try not to necessarily keep gates and influence that in that way. But because I've been authentic to who I am and what I want to do and what I achieve, when I'm passionate about, people listen to me, people hear me, people want to know what my opinion is on this or that. And that's where the authenticity in yourself is critical. The ability to be integral, because a lot of times, there are realities in terms of integrity and character that make people say, I can't invest in you, I can't support you because you did this, you did that, or I heard that you did this or did that. That we've got to put it on our own selves to be as integral as possible. Forget our personalities as much. I mean, you can have personality clashes, but if you're still integral, people are still going to rock with you. If you show that you can't be as integral, if you do some underhanded, shady things, it's going to be tougher for people to really support you. If you have a history of doing that with others, not being able to build relationships, it's tough. Working with others without necessarily calling it a cooperative. But when you have something going on, invite individuals. Make sure you go to other farmers' things and support them. As a farmer who receives grants and things like that, I actually do events at other farmers' farms to make sure I can pay them a stipend or bring them in for webinars and other things so they can share the knowledge and information they have, and I can pay them. Those little tidbits help to build relationships. And agriculture is very much a relationship-based field and industry. So we've got to focus on building those relationships with our other farmers. And then when those relationships are formed, you can kind of approach individuals at a different level. 3 weeks ago, my congresswoman asked me to convene a group of Black farmers to discuss farm bill. That's because of relationships I had with her when she came to my farm, as well as relationships I have with my farmers. Every time she calls and wants to talk to Black farmers, she's on the House Ag Committee. We get a group of farmers and we can have a discussion and build those relationships and tear down trust. Trust is one of the biggest factors that you're going to deal with in terms of working together, growing together, moving past those things. And it's sell good stuff for what it's worth. And then find great markets to do that. Because a lot of times farmers have a tough time with this pricing. You're at a farmer's market and there's a farmer that's selling tomatoes at the end of July for $1 a pound. Your $4 or $5 a pound of tomatoes, it's a tougher sell. So building those relationships is a thing, and being able to find some alternative markets to be able to get the price and the value that you need, be able to support yourself. People listen to you when you seem like you have it together, when you seem like you're a success. They don't listen to you as well, in reality, when you seem like you're struggling. So get that air of success, of confidence, and work together in terms of creating these markets. That you're not competing against each other. You're competing, you're just asking for market share. And everybody can get a little market share, because within every, there's always a push for local farmers or local farmers, local farm products in every state in America. And no matter where you are, there's an institution that's local that can support you. I talk to farmers all the time, probably too much. So if there's any questions related to more targeted in terms of how to do it, or directly, specifically, then you email me and I can guide you or utilize some of my contacts to help guide you in that situation.
Thank you so much. I feel like what I just heard you say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to focus and have our intention for what we're growing, what we're doing. If we're not growing, if we're just working in ag or doing, to really focus and be punctual in that, and have integrity in our work and who we are. And then also to build genuine relationships, which this all marries into each other, and include others in that, relationship building, and to become a gate opener.
Yeah, a gate opener.
You're a gate opener, brother.
Yeah, and niche markets. Having a niche market for your products are critical. Niche market. Because you've got to be able to distinguish yourself from your other farmers, or a group of farmers that are growing the same. Like my farmers are under Cliff Slade and his Wisdom, a farmer here in Virginia, and all of his friends are growing elephant garlic all over the state, because that Cliff said grow elephant garlic, and they've all found markets for the elephant garlic. So, find your niche, grow your niche, and yeah, I'll stop right there.
I'll let you go. I appreciate you so much, and
no problem.
How genuine you've been today.